Good stewards know Advent calls us to turn no faces into yes faces. In our gospel passage that Deacon Jim just read, St. John the Baptist calls us to repent, to turn around our lives. All of us have things in our lives that we know could be better. And one of the calls of Advent is for us to find out what those things are and to turn them around, to turn the bad in our lives into good. Sometimes not easy, but it's required. Centuries ago, in England, the punishment for crimes was often cruel and unusual. Here's one case. Brandon stole some sheep. He was convicted, and his punishment was to have branded on his forehead an S period, T period. So for the rest of his life, everyone in his village was to know that Brandon was a sheep thief. Brandon could have become resentful. He could have said, I'll show them, I'll pay them back. But he didn't. It was Advent. And Brandon said, I need to turn around my life. And he did. He started being kind, caring, compassionate to everyone in the village. And it went on year after year after year. And finally, when Brandon was elderly, a little child, Henry, asked his dad what the S period, T period stood for on Mr. Brandon's forehead. And his dad knew it stood for sheep thief, but he told his little son, Henry, son, it stands for saint. And Henry began calling Brandon Saint Brandon. And pretty soon all the kids in the village were calling him Saint Brandon, and the adults picked up on it as well. Brandon turned around his life. We are all called to do the same. One of the ways to do that is to see God in everyone we meet. We are all children of God, every one of us. And we're supposed to see God in each other. And we're supposed to see God especially in those we can't stand, those we don't like at all, those who have done harm to us. Because Jesus says, if you're nice to those who are nice to you, you get a reward, but the reward's here on earth. If you want the reward to be in heaven, then you've got to see God in everyone, including those you just can't stand, and then respond as a child of God. Here's a story I haven't told for years. When I was president of the NBC television station in Nashville, my owner asked me to fire our general sales manager. I didn't want to do it. He was doing a good job. Good man. And I resisted for months. And finally the owner said, Mike, if you don't fire him, I'm going to get someone who will. Now, why did he want to fire him? Not because he wasn't selling a lot of advertising. He was doing a good job, but he was kind of sloppy fat. And the owner thought he was a bad image for the station. So I sat down with the owner and I said, look, I may have to leave, but here's the deal. I'll stay if you let me do this for Bob, the general sales manager that was fat. And he said, okay. So I was able to sit down with Bob and say, look, here's the deal, here's why you've got to go, but The owner has agreed to allow you to stay here on salary for 6 months. We're going to give you an office. We're going to give you a title as sales consultant so that as you look for work, you don't have to tell them you were fired. You can tell them, I'm the sales consultant at WSMV in Nashville, not that I was fired. Hired a new man. Right off the bat, I didn't like him. He was handsome. He, too, sold lots of advertising. But probably because of the circumstances, I resented him. And there were some personality traits that I didn't like. But one Saturday morning, when I was at my spiritual support group, the other men in the group said, Mike, you got to turn around your life. The new general sales manager's nickname was Goose, and they said, you've got to see God in Goose. He's as much a child of a God as you are. Be nice to him. Treat him fairly, but be nice. And so I began saying to myself, every time I see Goose, I'm going to say, see Goose, think God. See Goose, think God. All day long, I was saying that. And yes, it worked. Goose and I never became great friends, but we did become friends, and I learned to see the good in him. I learned to do that by seeing God in him. All of us are called to be like Brandon and turn our lives around, become saints under construction. All of us are called to see God in each other. And we're not only called to see God in each other, we're called to allow others to see God in our faces. When Thomas Jefferson was President of the United States, he and a group of his friends went out horseback riding. They came to a river swollen with rainwater, and they decided they would cross one at a time. There was also at the river a man who was on foot, and he watched as President Jefferson's friends rowed across the lake. Finally, when all of them had gone across the lake and only Thomas Jefferson was left, the man looked at Jefferson and said, "Sir, would you please allow me to get on your horse so that I can get across the river also?" And the president said, "Sure, hop on." When they got to the other side, one of Jefferson's friends asked the man who was on foot, "Why didn't you ask one of us? Why did you wait until you asked the President of the United States?" And the man was shocked. He didn't know this was the President of the United States. And his answer kind of shocked them, because the man said, "I looked at each of your faces, and he was the only one who had a yes face." That man saw God in Thomas Jefferson. It's Advent. We're all called, as John the Baptist says, to repent. We're all called to make our lives better. We can do that, turn our lives around like Brandon did and become saints under construction. We can do it as I did once in my life by seeing God in the faces of everyone we see, especially those we don't like. And we can do it by allowing others to see God in our faces. My sisters and brothers, we are all called to be good stewards. And good stewards, though Advent calls us to turn no faces into yes faces.